In the Van, which was soaring down the freeway, by Jeremy Void. In the van, which was soaring down the freeway in the fastest lane, there were 6 teenagers, ranging from the ages 14 to 20. Okay, I guess one, the oldest, was out of his teens. His name was Terry, and then there was Terry's younger sister, Marla, and Marla's boyfriend, Ricky, and then the driver, who they called Kevin, and finally the hitchhiking twins from Boston, Brianna and Hunter, who had grown up in Rutland, Vermont, and had come back for a wake. And afterwards they went bar hopping and found the town was lame, so they decided to hitchhike to Burlington when the van, going the other way, swerved to the left and shuddered over the yellow line and pulled to a haphazard stop on the side of the highway. The sliding door opened with a bang, and thick billows of smoke, which clearly smelt of pot, poured out the opening, and through the smoke screen emerged Ricky, who hopped out and gestured the siblings in. Brianna entered first, then Hunter, who was behind her, and as he climbed in, Terry bumped his shoulder going out and bent and vomited in the brush lining the edge of the street. In the van, Ricky introduced them to his girlfriend, Marla, and in the front, Kevin turned his head toward the back and he said yo and told them his name. What were they doing out here this late at night? He asked the twins. Brianna told him the story, told him how they'd come from Rutland, which was a bust, and were now heading to Burlington. So Ricky asked if they were indeed looking for thrills, for kicks, shits, and giggles, and Hunter nodded yes and said of course they were, and a fat blunt appeared in Hunter's face. He took it from Marla's grasp, and he took a toke and pulled it in and held the smoke down, and when he passed it off to Brianna, Terry entered the van and slammed the door shut. The van rumbled to a start and eased out into the street and then took off. For Brianna and Hunter, it wasn't long before things started feeling fuzzy, like the dots, the polka dots, or whatever you want to call those things, flashing and flickering in front of Hunter's eyes like a disco light, and he attempted to bat them away like flies with his open hand. This act made Ricky laugh, and he nudged the shoulder of his girlfriend who was taking her turn on the blunt. The nudge startled her a bit, and she ripped the blunt from her mouth, diverted her eyes to her boyfriend, and then followed the line of his head gesture to where Hunter was swatting at the air with his hand, a phantom hand following its tread like a tail, and Marla laughed. Brianna didn't notice her brother's foolish behavior, for she had her own set of problems. She was walking toward the light, walking to heaven, and the light was so bright she couldn't see the passengers in the van anymore. Oh yeah, that's right, she was in a van, and in that moment the light sizzled out and someone slapped her hard in the face, her head whipping around and to the side, and she peered deep into her brother's apologetic eyes, could see his soul, the soul of someone who had just slapped her. Then the van swerved and the horn howled, and Hunter rolled over onto Marla, Brianna onto Ricky, while Terry was still standing, taking a hit, his back to the wall, which was without a doubt what had kept him right side up. As the twins got their bearings back, Brianna, still irritated by the slap to her face, but willing to forgive because it was her brother for Christ's sake, the couple on the floor plus Terry who was standing were all laughing and laughing, finding something funny, and they wouldn't stop, so Hunter rubbed his head, wondering what was so funny, then opened his mouth to speak, but his sister beat him to it and asked rather curtly what was the deal. The weed, Ricky laughed. It was laced with PCP, Marla added, laughing too. Only the thing was, how the laughing couple had said it was slow and low, like a deep droning voice, like if you put your tape player on slow, that was how they spoke it. And now the siblings were scared and mad for being betrayed like that, but then again they were never told, but just assumed the weed was clean, and they smoked it without question. And as Ricky explained that was the case, and Marla's laughter played in the background like a manic laugh track, and Kevin continued to drive, taking a hit as he did so, and Terry, well, Terry was being Terry. Brianna and Hunter continued to be angry, and they shouted. But what were they going to do about it now anyway, Terry challenged. He puffed out his chest and paced the center of the van, and Hunter's complaining retreated, but even so, Brianna poked a finger out and continued to shout. But a sudden backhanded slap took care of that right away. She looked at Terry. The man had done it to her and said, why did everybody keep hitting her? The whole van began cracking up, including Hunter, who was too scared not to laugh. Well, Brianna was not laughing, for she was just so damn mad. Hunter gave her a slight nudge and said, hey sis, ease up a bit. Something about the genuine calm in her brother's voice, or just the sheer fact that she wasn't alone, that her brother was here too, made her ease up on the anger she felt. The anger being slapped around by men. Ooh, how she hated that. And the anger being given PCP without being informed. She didn't know how she felt about that, because she would never have expected it to happen, not to her. But it had in fact happened, and then she'd gotten slapped twice. Once by her brother, which was okay to an extent, but Terry had slapped her too, and suddenly the anger was back. She was so mad. "Let me out of here," she demanded, pumping a pissed-off fist in the air. "Stop the van!" Kevin's head whirled and he was facing the back, and for the first time his eyes connected with Brianna's, and he said, "No dice." He said they don't stop. Not now, not then, not ever. But only when the sun comes out and the morning light casts shadows on the ground. And anyway, has that even happened yet? No, it hasn't. So why doesn't she shut the fuck up and smoke some more? She did shut up, although she didn't smoke anymore. Her brother too was horrified. And when the van rolled into the gas station lot and the 3 passengers in the back, Ricky, Marla, and Terry, pulled out big heaving guns and put masks of dead poets on over their faces and threw open the door, he thought about running. Thought about it, but then saw the gun trained on him and his sister, Kevin holding it steady, Hunter thinking this was how it ended, and both twins' jaws dropped. They were stunned. "Don't even think about it," Kevin said behind the handgun he held expertly and kept aimed at the twins. If they tried anything, he warned, he would put a bullet through the back of their heads. Then he laughed and said, or he'd stick the gun at both their butts and the bullet would rip through their guts and they'd fall flat in the gas station lot as the van veered out and took off. Then in through the door came the 3 dead poets with a 5th man in tow, the store clerk, Hunter supposed, who had a dark stain over his crotch and smelled like piss, and he was all gross and freckly, Brianna observed. And then the van veered out of the gas station lot and the kids screamed as it cut right and the whole van quaked. Brianna grimaced when she saw the liquid pooling by the kid's right leg, dripping out of his pants, although Hunter didn't notice it himself, and instantly his own bladder let go too, only moderately, and he glanced down at his pants feeling ashamed of himself, but there were no urine stains there, and although you'd think he'd be relieved, he wasn't at all, because these big guns, the biggest handguns he'd ever seen, were cocked and loaded and could take him out with only one shot. What was this young kid doing here, Brianna wanted to know, and practically snapped at the inhabitants of this van, but Hunter grasped her arm lightly and chided her to just let it go. "Let it go," she spoke unsurely to her brother, for when did his balls fall off? Her brother was never a wimp. In fact, Brianna had always admired his courage, his bravery, the fact that he would never back down. But now was different, as these guys and one girl who picked him up were carrying guns and holding a store clerk hostage for reasons unknown to her. A slight nod of her head signaled to her brother that she was scared, and she waved the PCP-laced smoke out of her face. "Can't believe they're still smoking that shit," she whispered to her brother. "Just play it cool," he suggested. "Play it cool. This will be over soon, and it wasn't worth losing an eye." "But what about the kid?" she said, clearly worried. "What about him?" her brother said, bashfully. There was nothing they could do. He was about to say more, to assure his sister that they would get out of here in one piece, when suddenly a sharp metallic sound stole his attention, and when he craned his neck that way, he found himself looking down the barrel of Ricky's gun. "Speak up," he ordered. "No secrets allowed." Brianna gulped and gave Hunter's arm a tug. Hunter looked at his sister, then back at the gun, then at Ricky, whose face was glazed over with a fierce stare, then at Marla, who was taking a toke from the blunt and then passing it off to the kid. "What was his name?" Marla asked him. He didn't speak, though. He just looked at Brianna, who was swiveling her head back and forth to tell the kid not to hit it. Marla repeated herself, and the kid looked back at her and flinched when she raised the gun overhead and moved to bring it down. "Just hit him with the butt of it." But the kid spit out, "James." His name was James, he informed them, passing the blunt to Terry. But Terry held out his hands and shook his head, and so the kid tried handing it off to Ricky, then Marla, then Brianna and Hunter, but nobody wanted it, and Ricky said, "Take a hit." The kid's head weaved. He looked like a frightened pig. "Take a hit," Terry said. "Take a hit," came from Marla next. "Take a hit," they all sang together. Brianna went to save the kid, to take the blunt from him, but the muzzle of a gun told her not to. Her hand retreated to her sides. Finally, the kid brought the blunt to his lips, but when the van swerved, he dropped it on the floor. The van rumbled and then stopped. Terry threw open the door and grabbed James on his way out. With his gun, Terry led James through the field, down a hill, with Brianna and Hunter on their heels, while 3 handguns were poking them in the backs and directing them to keep on going, to follow James and Terry. And they did. They went. They staggered. The PCP still controlling their minds, with dots appearing in Hunter's sight and a bright light in Brianna's. They went forward, and could hear Kevin, Ricky, and Marla laughing at their rears, shamelessly like a bunch of hyenas. Hunter looked up at the sky, and there were a ton of stars up there. In spite of everything tonight, he had to admit the sight was rather beautiful, and he let his sister know, and she took a gander upward and for once smiled at the sight, and the expression on her face assured Hunter that he wasn't just seeing the stars, that it wasn't just an effect of the PCP, although some of the stars Brianna herself couldn't see, because some of them were indeed just a direct effect of the PCP. Which ones, Hunter would never know, and he wasn't about to ask, because the sight was pretty and that was all there was to it. They came to a line of trees and were led to a narrow path that cut through the center, and looking down the trail, Hunter couldn't see a thing, nor could his sister, who was frozen at the start of the trail, frozen solid and too scared to move. Kevin nudged her with his pistol, but even so she remained frozen. He pushed her harder, and Hunter extended his hand to hers, and together, hand in hand, they walked along the dark path, the wind swooshing loudly through the trees, and the branches scraping together like grinding teeth, the leaves flittering about. It sounded like the trail was haunted, like ghouls were swooping through the woods. They continued through the path, hands still clutched between them, and little slants of moonlight managed to break through the gaps and sprinkle the ground with fluorescent cobwebs. There was a clearing up ahead, where James stood by himself, shaking in the cold air, and probably due to his frightened nerves too. He looked quite unhappy, his face contorted into a scowl, and his shirt was torn, a slash that ran from his right shoulder down to his chest at an angle and stopped halfway down his left side, and a flap hung over his stomach, and in the torn section you could see he wore a black thermal beneath his work shirt. His nose was bloody like he'd been punched there, and his lip was split in the middle, with a line of blood showing where exactly the lip parted, and he just looked so cold and frightened standing there on his own. Hunter ditched his captors and darted to where James stood shivering, his teeth thrashing inside his mouth, the sound loud enough for Hunter to hear when he reached him and asked if he was okay. It was then when Terry came back, his gun tilted and trained on Hunter, who, when seeing the deadly weapon, stepped back from James as Terry stepped closer, and Hunter kept going backwards. When Terry reached where Hunter had been standing in front of James, he ground his fist into James's gut. James folded when the fist connected, and he flopped down on his knees and bowed his head in defeat, and Terry prodded him in the head with the gun to get up now. James stood reluctantly, and when he was fully on his feet, Terry reeled in the gun and sent it backhandedly into James's mouth. The hit forced his face to the side, and the other 3 holding guns started cackling in laughter, but Brianna and Hunter weren't amused at all, and Hunter wanted to protest this, wanted to stop it and save the kid, being that he was a brave one, but Brianna's soft touch told him he shouldn't. She rubbed his hand with her thumb and pointer finger, keeping him calm and cool, and each twin's eyes met with the other's, and Brianna stared into her brother's eyes as Hunter stared into his sister's, and their heads sat motionless on their necks, facing the side, facing each other, and they were making a plan to escape via eye contact. The others didn't notice this because they were too busy laughing as Terry pummeled James with the butt of his handgun, slap after slap after slap. Brianna and Hunter didn't watch his beating, but heard the sound of the gun coming down on him, the sound of the butt connecting, and the sound of him yelping for help, screaming for his mother to come save and protect him. "Mommy! Mommy! Mommy!" and his pain cries were maddening. Neither Brianna nor Hunter knowing how the rest could take it, how they could find it so funny. Must be the PCP was what Brianna figured, still staring into her brother's eyes. Then there came the loudest sound of all, a deafening bang, which in a way forced the twins to look, and when they did, they saw James falling backwards, flat like a domino and flopping hard in the dirt, his head hitting the ground last with a loud crack, and smoke was trailing up from the muzzle of Terry's handgun, which he held pointed straight ahead. To be continued.